I want to tell you that the cost of the Middle East peace so far, to you, the American taxpayers, is $38 billion, and the clock is still running. Jordan was given $4 billion to sign this treaty. The other nations have been guaranteed credits and all sorts of things that will bring up the total to $38 billion for this so-called peace accord in the Middle East to come about. Of course, it's doomed to failure, but that doesn't matter. In the meantime, it makes the President of the United States look good. We need to understand something. I told you today there's anarchy and chaos in Washington. That is because the United States government is a government of strictly limited empowerment. It cannot just willy-nilly go making bills. For a measure to be introduced into the House, it has to be in consonance with or in pursuance of something already in the Constitution. If it is not, it is unconstitutional. And I've looked at 3,000 bills passed in recent years, and every one of them are unconstitutional because they were new things that some lighter-than-air incendiary fairy-head liberal said, well, I'm going to introduce this into the Congress. I'm going to have this law passed, like Dianne Swinstein's 19 assault rifles banned. There's no thing in the Constitution that would allow her to do that. Specifically, the 10th Amendment is very, very precise, and I can quote you 54 instances where this is mentioned in the Annals of Congress, the Congressional Records and Globes. The 10th Amendment is a restriction on the federal government. Our founding fathers were very frightened to give unlimited powers to the federal government. Daniel Webster said we must cage them like a lion, must not give them unlimited powers. It is a government of limited powers, but particularly the 18 Amendments. And just to make sure that the federal government would understand this, in the 18th Amendment, there's a little title that's very important. It says they can only do things that are necessary and proper. And I want to ask you, is rushing our troops off to Kuwait to protect the income of the decadent Al-Sabah family, whose money goes to the Royal Institute of International Affairs banks in London, is that necessary and proper for the United States to be doing? We don't get any benefit out of that. No. The 18th Amendment, necessary and proper. The 10th Amendment, the police powers of health, education, and police protection are entirely reserved for the states. And I can quote you 48 court cases from the Annals of Congress, from the statements made by the Founding Fathers. Those powers were never surrendered to the federal government. Therefore, the federal government has no business interfering in health matters, National Health Plan, no business interfering in crime bills, that's a matter for the states, and no business interfering particularly with the Second Amendment. I was in New York the other day on a radio program, and a very irritated, angry lady said she was a professor of law from Columbia. She came in on the program and she said, you don't know what you're talking about. She said, it's not a right to bear arms. I told her exactly what was what. And she said, well, if that's true, then voting is a right. I said, no, voting has never been a right. The only rights and the only civil rights we got are found in the Fifth Amendment. And that's all. Forget the 1868 Act. That was done when the United States, the southern states, were under occupation. They were occupied countries. Forget Nicholas Katzenbach's 1964 Civil Rights Act. The only civil rights we've got are those contained in the Fifth Amendment. And health, education, and police powers belong to the states. Mrs. Swinstein has no right passing a bill classifying 19 types of assault weapons. What is an assault weapon anyway? Any gun is an assault weapon. That's what you use guns for. You use it to shoot people or animals or protect yourself. Any gun is an assault weapon. A knife is an assault weapon. You know, now they have this poor, almost idiot Brady running around the country. They're using him shamefully to push for gun control. This man doesn't know whether he's Arthur or Martha at the moment. This is not an issue of gun control. This is an assault on the Constitution of the United States of America in total. You cannot take one part of the Constitution and attack it and exclude the others. And this is what it is. It is an attack upon the Constitution of the United States of America. We need to understand about GATT. I'd like to go back to that a little bit. Michael Carpenter, the Attorney General of Maine, and 46 other Attorney Generals of the states wrote a letter to Clinton last July, and they asked him, please, Mr. President, let us have a national conference of all Attorneys General of the states on this matter. Clinton refused to answer him. Instead, he got his Hollywood lawyer pal, Mickey Cantor, whose only expertise in the world is running around with a Hollywood crowd. He's a Hollywood lawyer. And suddenly, Clinton puts him in charge of trade. Trade wars, GATT, is piracy. It will destroy the livelihood of the people of this nation. What is the situation facing us right now? There's an attack on the dollar. The gnomes of the bond market are fleeing. I've written a work called The Economic Implosion, Year of Crisis, 1995, in which I predict the collapse of our economic system as we know it today, in pursuance of the GATT Treaty. One of the things I know for a fact that this will be an implosion, i.e. our system will collapse on the ground of which it now stands. It's not going to be an explosion that will scatter everything. And we know that GATT will come in and say how much you can get for your interest. They will also put the International Monetary Fund in charge of our finances, and banking in this country will be in the control of 5 major banks. That will help to control the situation and further destabilize the country. That is the aim and object of all of this. Once a nation is destabilized, it's very easy to deal with it and push it into a socialist new world order, a one world government. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say to you today, the time has come for us to recognize that we are 50 individual nations. We have all the rights of an individual nation. We gave only limited empowerments to the federal government. They have grossly, flagrantly violated the concord that we have with them. Therefore, we, the masters, have the right to go to Washington and tell them, the servants, henceforth, this concordat is severed, unless we understand from today all of these unconstitutional measures will be rolled back and a new system will come into being. The Federal Reserve Bank, that private enterprise bank, will be put out of business. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not anarchy. This is the God-given right of each of the 50 nations, of which the state of New Mexico is an individual nation. We are the only entity in the entire world that has a legal document that allows us to dissolve the federal government without resorting to violence and bloodshed. Ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you from my own experience that I have seen a rising tide in this country in the last 5 years. And I say to you today, in my closing remarks, let us catch the wave. My own plan is to form an organization, a foundation, if I can get people with money to back me, where I will teach what I've learned from the Constitution, what I've gleaned from the annals of Congress, the Congressional Globes, and the Congressional, to maybe 100 educators lawyers, if you will, other people who are interested, teach them what I know, which is enough for them to confound the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, not to mention those fairy heads we have in the House and Senate. They, in turn, will spread across the land, teaching others, and they, in turn, will teach others until we have a grassroots movement that is spread across this nation of people who really know, not just to recite the Constitution, but know all of the provisions, the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts, who, when somebody like Mitchell says, we're going to give 2 days for this gap treaty to be debated, 1 million people will demand and tell him that you, sir, are exercising arbitrary power and you shall not be allowed to do this, and quote the Constitution. We could do that with every one of these unconstitutional measures. It is the federal government that is creating anarchy, not we, the people. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.